Your love, Lord, reaches to the heavens, and your faithfulness to the skies. Your righteousness is like the highest mountains, your justice like the great deep. You, Lord, preserve both people and animals. How priceless is your unfailing love, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house. You give them drink from the river of your delights, for with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see true light. Our gospel reading this morning is the first 11 verses from John's gospel. You'll recognize it. On the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why are you involving me?" Jesus replied, "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used in Jewish rites of purification, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and so they filled them right up to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." And they did so. And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, although the servants who had drawn the water, they knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the best wine first, and then, Everyone brings out the best wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have There was water. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the best wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you save the best for last." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. This is the word of the Lord to us this morning. Thanks be to God. We are still in the season of Epiphany, that is, the revelation of God is with us, Emmanuel. First as a baby in a manger, the son of Mary and Joseph. The Magi came, and we realized that the Magi were Zoroastrian priests, and they represented the Gentile world. And then Jesus, as a young man, was revealed through his baptism as the Son of God, the voice from heaven saying, "You are my Son, the one that I love, and you delight me." Today, we read of his first miracle, and his first miracle allows the party to continue. Back in those days, a wedding wasn't just one day. It lasted for many days. By turning the water into wine. Now, we have to admit and realize that John's gospel is ripe with symbolism. There are details that John gives, such as he starts out this narrative, on the third day there was a wedding. That's important. He also points out that Jesus used 6 stone jars that had been used for the Jewish rite of purification, but now he fills them with water and turns it to wine. There's a lot there. We could go deep and it would put you to sleep, and we're not going there today. As I read this, and if you've read this over before, what I noticed is that the flow of the narrative is very bumpy and it's choppy. It doesn't flow very smoothly from one thing to the next. It leaves a lot out, which fills me with a lot of questions, perhaps you as well. Why did Mary tell Jesus they have no more wine? Why does Jesus speak to his mother the way he did? It sounded kind of harsh and maybe a little mouthy. It didn't sound nice. Thank you for agreeing. And then why does Jesus change his mind? He said, why are you involving me? It's not time yet. Well, what's really missing here is nonverbal communication, and that includes facial expressions, especially of the eyes and smiles, and also a tone of voice. Also missing, as I mentioned to our young disciples, we don't know anything about the growing up years of Jesus, the formative years. We don't know any details about his relationship with Mary and with his brothers and sisters. What happened to Joseph? He's there at the beginning, and then we don't hear about him anymore. We don't know. And we do often focus on his divinity to the neglect of his humanity. One of the Christmas carols talks about Jesus, the baby who never cried. Come on. He cried, like every other baby. So let's put this scenario in context. In the context of everyday life and relationships where you and I live. Imagine with me. Jesus is at the wedding with his mom and his new friends, Peter and Andrew, Nathaniel and Philip. Those were the first 4 disciples he called just before this wedding situation. And so Mary says to Jesus, they have no more wine. And why did she say that? Did Jesus help Mary out at home, like when she ran out of olive oil or wheat or wine? Mary's really concerned about the wine here. Extra virgin olive oil, that is. Couldn't leave that one on the table. Was Mary wanting another glass of wine? And then Jesus says to Mary, what does this have to do with me? Now, I have 2 sons. We have a special relationship. It's very playful. So Mary says to Jesus, they have no more wine. Why are you involving me, Mom? Wink, wink, with a twinkle in his eye, with a smile on his face. He knows and she knows. She rolls her eyes at him because she knows that he knows what to do and he can do it. And so, of course, she says to the servants, just do whatever he tells you to. Doesn't that make more sense? It does to me. He had a playful relationship with his mom. He must have. Being the virgin conception and all that went on around it, there was something special there. So Jesus goes into the kitchen and he looks for the largest containers he can find. John tells us they're about 20 to 30 gallons each. They're filled to the water, filled to the brim. The sample goes to the manager. Now imagine the servants that filled it with water. Now take a sample to the manager of the banquet hall. No, you do it. You do it. No, I'm not going there. I'm going to bring him some water. So imagine one servant takes the wine glass with, he couldn't see, the wine glass with the stuff in it, and the other guys are hiding behind the corner watching to see what happens. And it turns out, sorry? Well, that could have happened too. It's your imagination, Elizabeth. You can go anywhere you want to with this one. He puts his cup to his lips, and it's the best. It is the best. What would you say? A Merlot, a Cabernet, a Zinfandel, something nice and big and bold and juicy. So what began as water, which is necessary and humble and life-giving, is turned into wine. And I see the wine as a sign of God's abundance, God's hospitality, and God's joy. And there's a lot of it. 120 to 180 gallons of the best wine money can't buy. That's hundreds of cases of wine. You see, the Messiah, the promised Holy One of God, begins his holy work, not with a display of power over nature, disease, or demons, not with a flashy revelation of his divinity, although that is there too. No, Jesus turns water into wine to keep the wedding reception going. A party where there's music and there's laughter and there's celebration. Jesus took time to celebrate with friends and his mom. Maybe she was his plus one. And his glory is revealed in this. Who is this Jesus, this God with us? John tells us in the very beginning of his gospel, and therein lies the connection to the glory that he follows up this narrative with. Listen, as John tells us. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That means he moved into the neighborhood. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came to the Father, full of grace and truth. And out of his fullness we have all received grace upon grace upon grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, however, grace and truth came to us through Jesus Christ. You see, no one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the relationship of closest intimacy with him, has explained him, has made him known, has revealed him. Epiphany. You see, John talks about this is the first sign, first of the signs through which Jesus revealed his glory, the glory of who he is, full of grace and truth, bringing us abundant grace, like this abundant amount of wine, this extravagant abundance is very representative of God's grace. One of my colleagues, an author and a seminary professor, Caroline Lewis at Luther Seminary in Minneapolis, writes this, and I couldn't put it any better in other words, so please hear Caroline's words. And so the point is that the wedding at Cana rolls out the rest of the Gospel of John as one grace upon grace moment after another that we get to see, to feel, to touch, and to hear, and in this case, taste the grace. Because what does grace upon grace taste like? The best wine and gallons of it when you least expect it. You see, John takes seriously that the Word became flesh and lived with us. The extravagant abundance of God's grace. Have you experienced this in your life lately? Have you realized it around you? You see, this grace is not earned and it's not expected. It's not conservative. It's not careful or exclusive. It certainly does not color inside the lines, because life doesn't exist inside the lines. Life is messy. This extravagant abundance of God's grace cannot be measured or controlled. The details of our lives, like a wedding celebration or a birthday party or retirement, the birth of a grandchild, the details, a raise. The seemingly small stuff, God is concerned with these parts of our lives, whether we realize it or not. God is there with us in the small stuff as well as in the big stuff. And he's there with the extravagant abundance of his grace. It's there in the small things, like a good glass of wine. This is Epiphany. This is the revelation of God's glory. And we respond to God's extravagance with love and with gratitude. God is concerned with the small stuff, and his response in the small things of life is extravagant, abundant grace. As you go out into your week, look for it. It's all around us. We just need eyes to see and ears to hear. Let's pray together.